The alarms began before the sun had fully risen. Deep within the cavernous stronghold carved into the mountainside, the sound of warning horns echoed like a storm breaking through stone, reverberating across chambers where ancient beings stirred from uneasy rest. Guards rushed through winding corridors, their movements sharp and urgent, their voices carrying fragments of fear. No one dared speak aloud in full. Something had gone wrong, terribly wrong. The hatchling was missing. Not just any hatchling. Their hatchling. The youngest of the brood, barely days old, fragile by their kind's standards, and yet more valuable than entire kingdoms. The child of a lineage that had not seen new life in generations. Panic spread quickly, controlled only by discipline and the weight of what failure would mean. Search every passage. One commander barked, his voice echoing harshly against the stone. No crevice unchecked, no tunnel ignored. But even as the orders were carried out, a deeper, more dangerous truth settled into the minds of those who understood the situation best. There were only two possibilities. The hatchling had wandered, unlikely, but not impossible given its young, curious nature. Or, it had been taken. And if it had been taken, then what they would find would not be a rescue. It would be a tragedy. Far below the mountain, where the land softened into fields and quiet forests, the world moved at a different pace. There were no alarms here, no rushing guards, only the gentle rhythm of a morning that had not yet been disturbed. A small wooden house stood at the edge of a clearing, worn by time but cared for with quiet persistence. Smoke drifted lazily from its chimney, carrying the faint scent of breakfast into the crisp air. Inside, a man sat near the hearth, his back slightly slouched from years of labor, his hands rough but steady as he carefully adjusted a blanket draped over his arms. His name was Rowan. He was not a warrior, not a hunter, not someone anyone would look at twice in a crowd. Just a man who lived alone, working his land, surviving one day at a time. Or at least, he had been alone. Now, cradled in his arms, was something no one would have believed if they had seen it. The hatchling. Small compared to its kind but still far from ordinary. Its body was covered in soft, newly formed scales that shimmered faintly in the firelight, shifting between deep bronze and muted gold. Its wings were not yet strong enough to hold it aloft, folded carefully against its sides, rising and falling slowly with each soft breath. It slept, completely, peacefully asleep. Rowan stared down at it, his expression caught somewhere between confusion and quiet awe. He still didn't fully understand how this had happened. The night before had been ordinary, cold, quiet, uneventful. He had been gathering wood near the edge of the forest when he heard it. A small sound, not quite a cry, not quite a call, something in between. Curious, he had followed it, pushing through the undergrowth until he reached a shallow hollow in the earth. And there it was. Alone, shivering, eyes barely open. He had expected fear. Instinct had told him to step back, to leave it, to understand that something like this did not belong to him, that touching it could mean death. But the hatchling had looked at him, not with aggression, not with instinctive hostility, but with something softer, something helpless. And before he could stop himself, before reason could fully take hold, he had picked it up. It had not resisted. It had not fought. It had simply curled slightly against him, its small body pressing into the warmth he offered. And then, it had fallen asleep. That had been hours ago. He hadn't moved much since. Didn't dare to, because despite everything, despite the danger he knew this represented, he couldn't bring himself to set it down. Not out there. Not alone. The hatchling shifted slightly in his arms now, a small movement that brought Rowan's attention back instantly. He adjusted the blanket gently, careful not to wake it. "Easy," he murmured quietly, his voice soft in a way it rarely was. The creature made a faint sound, something like a sigh, then settled again. Rowan let out a slow breath. "You picked the wrong place to wander into," he muttered under his breath, though there was no real frustration in it, only concern, because he knew. He wasn't foolish. Creatures like this didn't just exist without others nearby. And if this one had been lost, it would be searched for. And when they came, because they would come, they wouldn't assume kindness. They wouldn't assume protection. They would assume the worst. Above, the search intensified. The trackers had found something. A trail not obvious, not clear, but enough. Broken branches. Disturbed ground. Faint traces of movement leading away from the mountain, down toward the forest below. "It's alive," one of them said, relief and tension mixing in his voice. "The trail is fresh." But the relief didn't last long, because the trail didn't just lead away. It led somewhere, toward the human settlements. Another added, his tone darkening. Silence followed. Heavy. Uncomfortable. "Prepare yourselves," the commander said finally, his voice low, controlled. "If the hatchling has been taken." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone understood. They moved faster after that, their pace no longer cautious but urgent, driven by a fear that pushed them beyond protocol. Back in the small house, Rowan shifted slightly in his seat, his eyes drifting toward the window. Something felt off. The air had changed. Not visibly, not obviously, but enough for instinct to notice. He had lived alone long enough to trust that feeling. "We might have company soon," he said quietly, glancing down at the sleeping hatchling. It didn't respond. Still peaceful. Still unaware. Rowan hesitated, just for a moment. Then he tightened the blanket around it slightly, as if that could protect it from what was coming. "Guess we'll deal with that when it happens," he added under his breath. Outside, the forest had grown still. Birds had gone quiet. The wind had slowed, and in the distance, shapes moved. Fast, silent, purposeful. The searchers had found the house. They approached carefully, spreading out, surrounding the clearing with practiced precision. Weapons were drawn, not out of aggression but readiness, because whatever they were about to find, they had already prepared themselves for the worst. The commander stepped forward slowly, his eyes fixed on the small wooden structure. "If the hatchling is harmed," one of the others whispered behind him. He didn't respond. He simply moved closer. Inside, Rowan stood now, the hatchling still in his arms, his posture calm but firm. He didn't reach for a weapon, didn't prepare to fight. He just waited, because running wasn't an option, and neither was abandoning what he held. The door creaked slightly as the first presence reached it. A shadow fell across the threshold, and for a single, suspended moment 2 worlds stood on the edge of collision. They had braced for tragedy, for loss, for rage, but what they were about to find would be something none of them expected. The door did not burst open. That alone was the first surprise. Instead, it creaked inward slowly, deliberately, as though whoever stood outside understood that what lay beyond it required caution, not force. Morning light spilled across the wooden floor, stretching toward Rowan's boots as he stood in the center of the room, the small bundled form of the hatchling still resting in his arms. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then the first figure stepped inside. He was tall, armored, his presence carrying a weight that filled the entire room without effort. Behind him, others lingered at the edges of the clearing, their shadows visible through the open doorway. Their eyes, all of them, locked onto the same thing. The hatchling. Rowan didn't speak. He didn't step back either. His grip tightened just slightly around the blanket. Not possessive, not aggressive. Protective. The armored figure's gaze flicked from Rowan's face down to what he held. And in that instant, something shifted. Because the hatchling was alive. Not just alive, but peaceful. Asleep. Its small body rose and fell in steady rhythm. Its wings tucked close. Its tail loosely curled around Rowan's wrist like it had found a place it trusted. The man's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in disbelief. This was not the scene they had prepared for. There was no blood, no struggle, no signs of harm. Just a human, standing still, holding something that should have feared him, yet clearly did not. "Set it down." The command came low, controlled, but firm enough to carry authority. Rowan didn't move immediately. His eyes stayed on the man in front of him, reading him, measuring him in the same way a farmer might study an incoming storm. Dangerous, yes, but not without thought. "It's sleeping," Rowan replied quietly. The room seemed to tighten at his words. Not defiance. Not quite compliance either. Just truth. The armored figure took one step closer. The wooden floor creaked under his weight. You will place the hatchling on the ground. Now. Rowan's jaw shifted slightly, tension rising, but his voice stayed calm. If I do, it'll wake up. A pause. A strange one, because this wasn't how this was supposed to go. The commander, because that's what he clearly was, had faced enemies, rebels, beasts far more threatening than a lone human in a wooden house. Yet here now he hesitated, not out of fear, but because something in front of him didn't fit the world he understood. His gaze dropped again to the hatchling. It stirred slightly, pressing closer into Rowan's chest, a soft sound escaping it. Not distress, not alarm, comfort. The commander's hand, still resting near the hilt of his weapon, slowly relaxed. Explain, he said, the word quieter now. Rowan exhaled softly, shifting his weight just enough to ease the pressure on his arms without disturbing the creature. Found it in the forest last night, he said. Alone. Cold. His eyes flicked briefly toward the open door, toward the shapes beyond. Figured something like this didn't belong out there by itself. One of the figures outside took a step forward, clearly agitated. You expect us to believe? Enough. The commander's voice cut through sharply this time, silencing the interruption instantly. His attention remained on Rowan. You touched it, he said. Not a question. Rowan nodded once. Yeah. And it did not attack you. Another statement. Rowan gave a small shake of his head. No silence stretched again. But this time, it wasn't filled with tension. It was filled with something else. Processing. Because this wasn't just unusual. It was unheard of. Hatchlings did not trust. Not like this. Not with humans. Not with anyone outside their own kind. Yet here it was. Sleeping, undisturbed, completely at ease in the arms of someone it should have rejected instinctively. The commander took another step forward, slower now. Careful. May I? He asked. The shift in tone was subtle but undeniable. Rowan hesitated, just for a moment. Then he adjusted his stance slightly, not stepping aside, but allowing space. Slow, he said quietly. The commander nodded once. Then, with a level of caution that would have shocked anyone who knew him, he extended his hand. Not toward Rowan. Toward the hatchling. His fingers stopped just short of touching it. Waiting. Watching. The hatchling stirred again, its small head shifting slightly under the blanket. For a brief second, one eye opened, a faint glow flickering within it. It looked at the commander. And then, it closed its eye again, settling back into Rowan's chest without a single sign of distress. The room went completely still. One of the figures outside whispered something under their breath, something that sounded dangerously close to disbelief. The commander slowly withdrew his hand, his expression unreadable, but the impact of what he had just witnessed was clear. It trusts you, he said. Rowan didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the small creature in his arms, then back up. Seems that way. The commander exhaled slowly, turning slightly as if to gather his thoughts, but his attention never fully left the scene. Do you understand what you've done? He asked after a moment. Rowan shrugged faintly. Kept something from freezing to death. The simplicity of the answer hit harder than any explanation could have. Because that was it. No strategy. No hidden motive. Just a choice. A simple human choice. One that had somehow crossed a boundary no one thought could be crossed. Outside, the tension began to shift. Weapons lowered, not completely, but enough to show that something fundamental had changed. They had come prepared for tragedy, for violence, for loss. But what they found instead was something fragile, something rare, something that couldn't be handled with force. The commander turned back fully now, his voice lower, more measured. We will take the hatchling back, he said. Not as a threat, as a necessity. Rowan nodded slowly. Figured as much. But he didn't move. Not yet. The commander noticed. There is no danger to it. he added, as if sensing the hesitation. Rowan's gaze held his for a moment longer. Then, carefully, very carefully, he shifted his arms. The hatchling stirred again, a faint sound escaping it as the warmth changed. Its small claws tightened slightly against the fabric of Rowan's shirt. And for the first time since they arrived, it resisted. Not with force, not with fear, but with reluctance. A soft, almost pleading sound filled the room as it pressed closer, unwilling to let go of the place it had chosen. Rowan froze. The commander did too, because this changed everything again. The hatchling didn't want to leave. And now, for the first time since the alarms had sounded, uncertainty crept in. Not about what had happened, but about what should happen next. No one moved. Not the commander, not the soldiers outside, not even Rowan. The faint, fragile sound from the hatchling seemed to linger in the air long after it had quieted, echoing through the small wooden house like something far louder than it actually was. The tiny creature pressed itself deeper into Rowan's chest, its small claws tightening just enough to hold on, not to harm, just to stay. And in that moment, every expectation the search party had carried with them began to unravel. This was not fear. This was not instinctive survival. This was choice. The commander's expression hardened slightly, not out of anger, but because the situation had slipped beyond the clean lines of duty and command. "It must come with us," he said again, though the certainty in his voice was not as absolute as before. Rowan didn't argue. He didn't step back either. He simply looked down at the hatchling, his brow furrowing faintly as he felt its grip, its warmth, the quiet insistence of something that did not understand orders or hierarchies, only comfort and safety. "I know," Rowan said softly, "but it doesn't seem to agree." A murmur spread among the figures outside. Some shifted uneasily, others exchanged glances, the tension returning. Not sharp, but uncertain. One of them stepped closer to the doorway, unable to hold back. "Commander, this is not natural," he said under his breath. "If the bond forms—" "There is no bond," another interrupted quickly, almost too quickly. "It's a hatchling. It doesn't know what it's doing." But even as the words were spoken, they rang hollow, because everyone in that clearing had seen it. The way the creature had settled, the way it had chosen, the way it refused to leave. The commander raised a hand slightly, silencing them again. His gaze remained fixed on Rowan, but his thoughts were clearly elsewhere now, turning, shifting, recalculating. "If it remains here," he said slowly, "it will not survive long." Rowan's eyes flicked up. "And if you take it like this?" he asked. The question hung there, simple, direct, unavoidable. The commander did not answer immediately, because he knew. A forced separation now, when the hatchling was this young, this vulnerable, could cause more harm than good. Not physical harm. Something deeper. Something harder to repair. The silence stretched again, but this time, it was broken by something small. A movement. The hatchling stirred more noticeably now, its head shifting under the blanket as it began to wake. Its eyes opened slowly, faint light flickering within them as it adjusted to the world around it. For a brief moment, confusion crossed its tiny features. It looked up, first at Rowan, then beyond him, toward the figures gathered in the doorway. The room seemed to hold its breath. This was it. The moment they had expected from the beginning. Fear, panic, instinct. But none of that came. The hatchling blinked once, twice, then made a soft, questioning sound. It did not recoil. It did not lash out. Simply observed. Then, without hesitation, it turned its head back toward Rowan and pressed itself closer, letting out a quiet, contented hum. The reaction hit harder than any display of aggression could have. One of the soldiers outside took a step back, his composure cracking slightly. "It's chosen," he whispered, almost to himself. The commander's jaw tightened. "It does not understand choice," he said, but there was less conviction in it now. Rowan adjusted his hold slightly as the hatchling shifted, supporting it more comfortably now that it was awake. "Maybe not the way you think," he said, "but it knows what feels safe." The hatchling made another soft sound, almost as if agreeing, its small tail curling more securely around Rowan's arm. The commander watched this carefully, his mind clearly weighing possibilities that had never been considered before. This was no longer a simple retrieval. It had become something else entirely, something that would not be resolved by force or command. If it stays, one of the others spoke up cautiously. What does that mean? No one answered right away, because the implications were too large, too uncertain. A hatchling choosing a human, trusting one, remaining with one. It challenged everything they believed about their kind and about humans. The commander finally exhaled, a slow, controlled breath. It means, he said carefully, that we proceed differently. All eyes turned to him. Rowan remained still, but his attention sharpened. You will come with us? The commander continued, his gaze settling firmly on Rowan now. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even quite an order. It was a decision. Rowan blinked once, caught off guard. Me? The commander nodded. The hatchling will not separate from you willingly, and forcing it could cause harm we cannot risk. He paused, then added, so you will accompany it. The words settled heavily in the room. Rowan let out a quiet breath, glancing down at the small creature in his arms. It looked back up at him, eyes bright, unaware of the weight of what had just been decided. You're serious, Rowan muttered. Completely, the commander replied. Rowan gave a small, almost disbelieving shake of his head. I've never even left this valley. Then you will, the commander said simply. Another pause. Rowan looked toward the open door, toward the figures waiting beyond, toward the world he had never been part of. Then he looked back at the hatchling. It shifted slightly, its small wing brushing against his arm, its presence warm and steady. He sighed, not out of frustration, not out of fear, just acceptance. Guess I don't have much of a choice, he said. The commander held his gaze for a moment, then gave a single nod. No, he said, you don't. Outside, the formation began to shift. Not into attack, not into retreat, but into something new. An escort, a protection detail. Not for a prisoner, not for a threat, but for something far more uncertain. As Rowan stepped toward the doorway, the hatchling still held securely in his arms. The clearing seemed to change around him. What had once been his entire world now felt small, distant. Behind him, the quiet house stood still, unchanged. Ahead of him, everything was different. And as he crossed the threshold, carrying a creature that had chosen him for reasons no one could fully understand, one truth settled quietly into place. They had braced for tragedy, but what they found instead might change everything. The journey began in silence, but it was not the same silence that had filled the clearing before. This one was heavier, charged with awareness, with eyes that watched every step Rowan took as he walked at the center of a formation that was no longer hostile, yet not entirely at ease. The soldiers moved with disciplined precision around him, their attention split between the surrounding terrain and the small figure in his arms. The hatchling remained calm, its body relaxed against Rowan's chest, occasionally shifting just enough to adjust its position before settling again, as though the movement of the group itself had become part of its comfort. Rowan, however, felt every gaze, every unspoken question pressing against him. He wasn't supposed to be here, not among them, not walking alongside armored figures whose presence alone spoke of battles and histories he had never been part of. And yet, here he was because something far more powerful than orders had decided it so. Does it always stay that quiet? One of the soldiers finally asked, his voice low, almost hesitant, as if unsure whether speaking at all might disturb the fragile balance of the situation. Rowan glanced down briefly, watching the hatchling's steady breathing. Mostly, he replied. It makes small sounds sometimes. Nothing loud. The soldier nodded slowly, clearly unsure how to respond to something so simple. For them, hatchlings were not quiet creatures. They were unpredictable, volatile, driven by instinct. But this one defied all of that. Hours passed as they moved through the forest, the terrain gradually shifting from dense trees to open stretches of land that revealed just how far they had come from Rowan's home. The mountains loomed in the distance now, their peaks cutting into the sky like ancient sentinels waiting for their return. Rowan followed without question, his steps steady despite the unfamiliar path. Every now and then, the hatchling would lift its head, its glowing eyes scanning the world around it with quiet curiosity before returning to rest against him. It did not seem afraid. Not of the soldiers, not of the journey, only aware, and always anchored to him. As the sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the ground, they reached the base of the mountain range. The air here felt different, thinner, colder, carrying a weight that spoke of something ancient and powerful hidden within the stone itself. The entrance to the stronghold was not obvious at first glance. Just a jagged opening in the rock face, partially concealed by natural formations. But as they approached, movement revealed its true nature. Guards stepped forward from hidden positions, their presence emerging like shadows taking form. They stopped when they saw the group. Then their eyes shifted, to Rowan, to what he carried. And for the first time since the journey began, the silence broke in a different way. "It's alive," one of them said under his breath, disbelief clear in his tone. And with him, another added, his voice quieter, more uncertain. The commander stepped forward, his presence immediately restoring order. "Stand down," he instructed. "We return with the hatchling, and its chosen guardian." The words caused a ripple among the guards. Not loud, not chaotic, but undeniable, because that term, chosen, was not used lightly. Not ever. Rowan felt the weight of it, even if he didn't fully understand what it meant. The hatchling shifted slightly, sensing the change in atmosphere, its small claws tightening once again. Not in fear, but in instinctive response to something unfamiliar. Rowan adjusted his hold gently. "It's all right," he murmured softly. The creature relaxed almost instantly. The commander noticed. Of course he did. Everything about this situation demanded attention. As they moved into the stronghold, the world changed again. The natural light of the outside faded, replaced by a dim, ambient glow that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The space opened into vast chambers, far larger than anything Rowan had ever imagined. Their ceilings stretching high above, supported by massive stone pillars carved with markings he couldn't begin to understand. And everywhere they were watched, not openly, not aggressively, but constantly. Figures stood along elevated paths, within shadowed alcoves, their eyes following the group's progress with a mix of curiosity, caution, and something else, something closer to awe. News had already spread. By the time they reached the central chamber, there was no doubt about it. This was not just a return. This was an event. The chamber itself was enormous, its scale dwarfing everything within it. At its far end, a raised platform stood, carved from the same stone but shaped with deliberate precision. And upon it waited a presence that made even the commander pause slightly. Larger, older, not just in size but in something deeper. Authority, power, legacy. The hatchling stirred more noticeably now, lifting its head fully as its glowing eyes locked onto the figure ahead. A soft sound escaped it, not fear, not distress, but recognition. Rowan felt it immediately, the shift in its body, the awareness that something important stood before them. The commander stepped forward and bowed his head slightly. "We have returned," he announced. "The hatchling is safe." A long pause followed. Then, slowly, the figure on the platform moved. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with a presence that filled the entire chamber without effort. His gaze settled first on the hatchling, then shifted to Rowan. And in that moment, Rowan felt something he had never experienced before. Not fear, not exactly, but the undeniable awareness that he stood before something far beyond him. Ancient, knowing. The voice, when it came, was deep, resonant, carrying through the chamber like a distant echo. "So we see," it said. Silence followed again, but it was different now. Focused, heavy with meaning. The hatchling let out another small sound, this one softer, almost questioning, as it looked between Rowan and the figure before them. Rowan instinctively adjusted his hold again, steadying it. The massive figure's gaze did not leave him. "You held it," it said. Not a question. Rowan nodded slowly. "Yeah." Another pause. Then, "And it did not reject you." Rowan shook his head. No, the chamber remained still, every presence within it waiting, watching, judging. Then, slowly, very slowly, the great figure inclined its head. Not deeply, not fully, but enough. And in that single, subtle motion, everything shifted. Because it was not acknowledgement of power. It was acknowledgement of something else entirely. Something no one had expected to find that day. Trust. The voice echoed once more, quieter this time, but no less powerful. "Then you will remain." Rowan blinked, caught off guard again. "Remain." The figure's gaze sharpened slightly. "Until it chooses otherwise." The hatchling made a soft, content sound at those words, settling back against Rowan as if the decision had already been made. And in that moment, standing in a place he had never belonged, surrounded by beings he did not understand, Rowan realized something simple and undeniable. He hadn't just saved the hatchling. Somehow, without meaning to, it had chosen him.